well, I mean, Gaita does not talk at all about God. Okay, he's not a Christian, so he's not coming from that. But with Weil, okay, God becomes absolutely central to the picture. So in this essay, her central idea is that, and she's talking more about school studies than about university studies. She's talking about high school and indeed primary school. And her central idea is that school studies are a preparation for prayer through the cultivation of a power or capacity that she calls attention. And I guess one of the things we've got to do is try and can we elucidate this notion of attention, or does that connect to your thinking here, Vlad?
Yeah. So I would say that whereas for Gaita, the spiritual value, the value of a subject which makes it a worthy object of love. I mean, English is a little bit funny with the word love, because, you know, we just throw it around in all sorts of ways. I love chocolate.
Iris Murdoch says it's the name for the general quality of attachment. Yeah,
well, indeed. And it's unfortunate that English, unfortunate for the present purposes that English allows for that, because when Gaita wants to talk about love of a subject, he means it in a much more profound sense. Like I've said before, we can come back to maybe talk a little bit about how he thinks the love of a teacher for his subject might be revealed, might be revealed. Okay, but for him, there's a problem about the language that we've got. We are lacking. We're deficient, given the cultural context in which we are. He thinks to find the words to express this deep value. Now, with Weil, spirituality in education enters through faith. I mean, she is a Christian, and when she speaks of the spiritual in the education, so when she wants to attach to the educational practice, it's not that whatever education practices there are have some kind of intrinsic spiritual value. Whatever spiritual value they have, it is derivative, recessive, in some sense, as Gaita would put it, in relation to the love of God. Okay? So what makes school studies into something that has spiritual value is not that the subjects themselves have an intrinsic spiritual value, it's that in learning the subjects in a certain way, a certain attitude that you can bring, or let me just put it like that the learning of the subjects lends itself to receiving a kind of attitude that you bring to it, which once brought to it makes them spiritually valuable. So what she's describing for us is a way of learning, I would say to you, as a spiritual exercise.
Yes.
So she's describing the qualities of learning as a spiritual exercise with a view to the love of God. And that's how learning can have spiritual value.
Now you make a good point, and there's a contrast to with Gaita, I think, because you make a good point when you say that the object of study does not have to be anything of some particular deep importance. So, you learn French, you learn the grammar of French. Now, learning French, I think, is important, and the literatures of it. But to learn the grammar, okay, there doesn't seem to be anything.
It's not whether it's important. She might agree that it's important. She's trying to. She's trying to bring the learning within the realm of a life that is lived spiritually. She wants to say that there is a spiritual worth in education, but only because it lends itself to a certain kind of spiritual exercise. It's structured adequately enough to become a part of a spiritual practice or a spiritual exercise. And I will explain to you why I see it. Or you probably agree with me.
Yes, I'm not. I mean, I was going in a slightly different direction. My thought was that if you start conjugating verbs or declining nouns in Latin or French or something or other, and you don't get the sense that you're dealing at that point in your study of the language with something kind of spiritually profound. So it's natural to think that what's important here is the cultivation of this capacity for attention, and it's not so much important what it's attended to. And I thought that was quite a contrast to Gaita, where I think that for him it's really important that there is a spiritual depth in the content here for Gaita, I think, as well, and not just in the discipline in the discipline. So I think that's a contrast there, that Weil is in a way transcending the content in order to get to the transcendent good, which is God. Gaita is more focused on, I think, the content of the subject, but not of course in the sense of, again, of information or data or anything like that. If you learn a language for the purposes of travelling overseas or something, you have a phrase book or whatever, and you learn it,
you can ask for a coffee in Italian, you can ask for a coffee.
Whatever, and you what you get in a university subject on Gaita's conception is not merely that at a much more sophisticated level. What you're getting is an initiation, I'm going to return to the language that sort of that Oakeshott uses, but into a tradition of which Gaita has tried to bring out that you have to appreciate its spiritual value, that it can be something that you could worthily give your life for. And I think that's got to involve the content of the subject. Again, but I'm struggling. I admit I'm struggling here to elucidate this. It's not content in the sense of data and information. It's when you look, say, at Socrates, you can say here, Socrates had an idea. Here it was. It is better to suffer evil than to do it. Okay. Well, okay. What do you mean by that, Socrates? How do we understand that? What kind of an ideal is that? Is that how we should live? When one thinks about that, and when one tries to understand it, the understanding of it is not separable from understanding the life of not just the teaching, okay, the noises coming out of the mouth of the philosopher who said it, but the life that he lived and the death that he died. And if you want to take seriously his idea that it's better to suffer evil than to do it, then you need, at least to some extent, to see what kind of a living force that could be in your own life. So again, it sort of comes back to the question earlier, could we now, today, take seriously the idea that philosophy is something worth dying for? So I think that's the sense in which, for Gaita, content is there, but it's content with a deep richness to it. With they, if I can just finish, with they, there is a transcendence of content. I do wonder whether it could be the case, I mean, let me put it to a hypothetical question. I mean, is her transcendence of content so complete that, I don't know, counting the number of jelly beans in a jar, could be something which would train the capacity for attention. I don't know. I'm still inclined to think that the school studies must connect to something which, if pursued, the content will have deep significance as well.
Remember I asked you the other day, what is prayer?
Yeah.
Okay, the central concept for her is a prayer, is that of prayer. And that is a very, very strange context. I mean, do you pray? Mm-hmm. Do you pray, Andrew?
I have done.
You have done.
Put it that way.
How
Not regularly.
How do you pray? Right. You're right. So I mean, it matters very much. I don't pray. Okay, I'm just going to say, but I mean, prayer is a kind of spiritual exercise, and it can be carried at a very high level. It can be carried, at a very simple kind of level, but we can go back. Immediately I thought of Saint Augustine as a reference point. Why? Well, this is where my discernment led me. I thought that would be a fitting author in order to understand what they thinks prayer is and how she thinks of it. One of the difficulties that we have is, I remember one time when I was visiting Michael Bradley, I mentioned to him that, in passing, that I'd been having some...
This was a philosophy teacher of ours. So, yeah.
In the analytic tradition, in the analytic, very, very hard-nosed analytic philosopher, very rigorous. I mean, I say this with utmost respect. Yeah. Indeed, he was very dear to me, and I learned a lot from him. I think in the attention that he gave to the subject, I think Vai would have found a lot to admire. Michael gave you a very strong sense of kind of rigor and discipline and attention. Michael, I said to him, I've been thinking a bit about prayer and what that might be about. And he gave me this look. Oh, dear boy.
You're lost.
I can't understand how anyone can take this after Hume, after David Hume, the great Enlightenment skeptic, how anyone can take this sort of thing seriously. Indeed, I think it's very hard for us to think of God, to get a sense of what it might mean to say that God is real. And I want to offer, going back to Plato, a kind of entry point to help us help us get some kind of handle on that. I mean, I want to take seriously, as seriously as I possibly can, what Weil is telling us. Unlike Michael.
Yeah.
So I want to, I mean, Michael would probably find what I'm doing a waste of life. But what I'm about to do, to embark on just now, is something, I'm not in that place where when I come across such views, I feel that I've occupied a space, epistemic, existential space, where I can just like sneer or laugh. And actually it's more than that. I feel that I can, that I'm dealing with an authentic person, and that I have a sense of owing it to her, that I make an effort.
You mean?
That's right. To see where she's coming from.
Okay.
So, what I want to say is this. Weil's way of thinking about God is anchored not in the modern scientific way of thinking, but it goes back to Plato, at least. So I think of her as a kind of Platonist.
Yes, she is.
And Plato, and it's not just Plato's, but something like the classical view of the world that we're talking about here is profoundly different from ours. What do I mean by that? There are a series of inversions that have taken place historically as we have moved from the classical world through Christianity to modernity. For Plato, it's important to understand the world of the senses, of touch, of sight, was not real in the way that we think it is. The world of the senses was imperfect, in constant flux, capable of being known, but with approximation imperfectly. It owed whatever degree of reality that it had to something else in which it was in some sense grounded, and which was the real. So the real for Plato is not what is immediately available to us through our senses, which, as we know, has become very much an object of knowledge through the rise of the modern science of nature. But what was real for Plato was the world where objects that were accessible to the mind and which had for him qualities such as they were permanent, they were eternal, they were perfect, and perfectly capable of being known. True philosophy for him, and this might actually help Socrates, considering a kind of possible answer to Callicles, true philosophy requires you to engage the mind in such a way that it turns away from everything that has to do with the flesh, the what we would call the ordinary worldly things, and redirect it, redirect the mind towards the ground of being, toward what's real. That was the point of the metaphor of the cave. Coming into the light describes a turning of the soul, of the direction of the mind away from the world and to the world of reality.
This is Plato's cave in the Republic.
Correct.
So, yeah.
But that's why. So when Socrates Socrates said that he doesn't have any doctrines to teach. There's something to do with what teaching was for Socrates. Socrates described himself as a midwife. He gave, in some sense, by engaging in a dialogue form with him, he was aiming to give birth to the man. But the man here being the true philosopher, which is the one who's capable of turning his or her being away from worldly things and worldly concerns and dedicated himself fully and completely to the life of the mind. I think that's a fair fair account, would you say?
Absolutely.
And so because it's in the nature of what he's trying to do that it has this sort of essential existential element where it requires sort of linear propositional language is not enough. It's not capable of, the sort of language that you find in any textbook. It's not capable of achieving it. You need something else. So in Plato's case, we've got the Platonic dialogue and a direct engagement between him and another human being. It's because you want them to see the world in a different light. Okay, so that the aim is to get
out of the cave and into the light of the sun. So,
Yeah,
Vlad,
yeah.
can I? I mean, there's a lot there.
So all I'm saying, there is a lot there, but what I am saying is this: if you don't understand this, if you don't get this, you won't understand. You won't understand why.
No, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
So let me pick up on this part of it about how is it that yes, I mean it is absolutely. I mean you can see with they the idea that you are trained, as it were, in the capacity for attention by first attending to school studies are just one kind of thing on which he's very explicit to say, very careful to say this. He's not claiming this is school studies are the only road to attention. I mean, he says that the manual arts and crafts, for example, can also be roads to attention. I think he would see that the artist who can look at the object that they're painting or sculpting, for example, is also very much cultivating the capacity for attention, which ultimately has its consummation in the capacity to attend to God. But you see a progressive, okay, the training which perhaps has, think of the training given to philosophers in the Republic, okay, which is ultimately to train them to be able to see the world in the light of the good, okay. Now with they, the similar idea, yes, very exactly as you say, quite analogous to Plato, is that we can attend to physical objects, we can attend in a slightly more abstract things in school studies, okay, in geometry or in learning French or whatever it might be in physics, okay. There is and you can see as you go on in school studies that there is often a gradual ascension away from the particularities of the tangible, palpable, material, sensory objects and towards more abstract concepts and more general thoughts. Yeah. And if I can just finish my thought here. And ultimately, so there might be a sense in her there that one is being trained ultimately, on her view, to attend to God. Now what is it, which is kind of the most ultimate, the most abstract, okay, the most removed from the palpable material world, and in that sense has a very close resemblance to the idea of the good. And of course, God is perfectly good, okay, and truth is in God. They is explicit about that. So, and the idea that truth and goodness and beauty are all linked is also essential to Plato. So the similarities are very similar. You can see her conception of education as being a way of taking people out of the cave. Okay, so in that sense, you're right. You see, it's a deeply Platonic conception of education. So to raise one of the difficulties with it, which you at one stage pointed to, and it is one of the difficulties. Okay, it's a difficulty about the nature of God. Ultimately, this is a pretty big topic, kind of. But
something can be said.
Yeah, okay. When you study the French, when you study the physics, when you study the geometry, you have some particular object, which is the object of your attention. But God, being transcendent, is not, as the apophatic tradition in particular in theology has stressed, God is not an object in the world. Okay, he is not a member of a kind. Okay, you can have more than one coffee plunger. Okay, you can have more than one Homeric God. Okay, there are many of them. Okay, but you cannot have one God as they in Christianity talk of God. Okay, God is not in that sense an entity that belongs to a kind. It's completely sui generis and completely transcendent of sensory perception and sensory stimuli. So there is a sense, an important sense, in which, into attending to God, there is a sense in which there is no object of your attention. Okay, now one needs to be careful here. Of course, this is not saying God is nothing at all. Okay. It's, when one talks about God, one is if you believe in God, then one is talking about something real. But it's not an object in the sense in which I tried to spell out, saying God is not a member of a kind. It's not a kind of replicable entity. It's not sensually perceptible and all those kind of things.
When we think of the real, okay, what is real, our idea of what it is for something to be real today is and perhaps this is related to the point of Friedrich Nietzsche's remark that God is dead. Okay? When we think for something to be real, we think of something like, I'm not saying that this is the only way. To be real is to be a causal power. Right? So that's what it is to be real. It's something that can be grasped within the mechanistic, instrumentalized. What I mean by instrumentalized, objects are made into things to be owned, possessed, manipulated, understood, taken apart, which is the view that modern science gives us. So what I want to say is that our view of what it takes for the dominant view of what it takes for something to be real is deeply conditioned by the modern science of nature.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that if God ever enters the picture is only as a hypothesis in order to fill in gaps in our understanding of what? The instrumentalized world.
Yeah.
So I'm pointing this out because if that's the way we think, it is not the way that Bai thinks of God.
No, that's right. Absolutely.
So her sense of what it is for God to be real is not our sense of what it is for something to be
I
real.
agree 100%.
For they, the reality of God is not the reality of a causal power.
No, I think that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, I want to make that clear. I'm not saying that the topic of what is it for God to be real, we've exhausted that. There's a lot there, and we need time and patience to see that through. But what I'm saying is that if you are ever going to have a hope in hell, just to blaspheme for a moment, a hope in hell of understanding her,
Yes.
you got to get away from your usual habits of thought.
She talks about not having incentives to pray, that you must get rid of all of, whether it's the incentive of ambition, the incentive of marks in an exam, whether it's the sensory stimuli of something beautiful or something that's, stimulates you, excites you in some sort of way. To attend to God, you become pure receptivity. Okay, and what you're trained in when you study a subject, a school subject, is that again you have a kind of unselfing, okay, a kind of getting rid of what Iris Murdoch calls the fat relentless ego, so that you become like a pair of scales. This is analogies to use in another writing, where objects that perceive, they just penetrate into the mind. It's like they're weighed on a pair of scales, and you are kind of passive in relation to that thing entering into you. But like a pair of scales is passive as it weighs the two objects which are on either end of the scales. And that's the kind of objectivity and impersonality that there is in the kind of education that she means. So eventually you have to reach the point where you become a kind of pure receptivity, which is not dependent upon any of these incentives. And then, as she says, as we were talking about the other night, you put it very, very beautifully, quoting from her, or referring to her, where she draws on one of the parables in the Gospels. It's when we've managed to achieve the condition where, and we should have said things, I'll leave them to you to say, it's about humility and patience, okay, whereby, okay, instead of trying to grasp hold of it with our own ideas and our own restless and impatient self, we have this passivity like the scales, which simply lets the thing come in at way itself. So eventually with God, if God is real, okay, then your patience will be eventually rewarded, maybe after many years of waiting, when in the terms of the parable, the master will open the door and will feed you meat.
She says that attention is the substance of prayer. She says that studies lend themselves to can, in the right circumstances, and I'm going to come back to what those circumstances are, cultivate the kind of attention which is can train you in some sense, are useful for developing that kind of sense. And I think you're right that she's talking here about a form of receptivity that has an element of is alert. I wouldn't call it passive,
Okay.
but it's alert, okay, but not,
That's a good word.
you
Yeah,
gotta
yeah.
be awake. You gotta be awake and alert.
Okay.
Okay, so it's not some kind of numbing of the mind. We're not going into let's just numb the mind. No.
I really liked your suggestion that we think in terms of alertness rather than in terms of passivity. I think that's definitely an improvement on. I don't think she uses the word passivity. I think I introduced that.
Yeah.
Though she does use the image of the scales, not in this work, but in other of her writings. But it's not a the kind of alertness. So as you said, you're not in a stupor. You're not in a drug-addled condition. You're not asleep. Okay. But equally, of course, in being alert, in being on guard, you require this kind of unselfing. I mentioned this Platonic idea that Iris Murdoch makes so much of, getting what Murdoch calls the fat, relentless ego out of the way, the fat, relentless ego which prevents us from seeing the reality of so much as a blade of grass, okay, because we always see everything in relation to ourselves. So if the guardsman, the sentinel on the wall is to be alert, okay, then he can't keep having his own ego, okay, get between him, okay, so I'm distinguishing him from the ego from the self here, get between oneself and the object of one's perception. So one, as it were, gets the curtain out of the way, gets all this filter, all this noise of the ego out of the way, so that there can be a kind of, almost in a way, in a sense, in a more useful sense, philosophers talk about direct perception, but more useful sense here of talking about direct perception of a reality. Now, and that means that all kind of premature impatience and grasping that's motivated by one's sense of importance and one's infatuation with one's own cleverness or one's desire to perfect one's own theory. And I think we've both known in our experience of philosophy, we've seen, and we're all vulnerable to it. I'm not sort of claiming to be immune to this. We all can be guilty of these things, but we've all seen a certain kind of thinker, a certain kind of philosopher who, particularly if they're very smart when they're very young, okay, incredibly quick, incredibly fast, but a real impatience in their intellectual style, in their intellectual mode, and they is the reserve, such that they foist their ideas very quickly upon an object of attention in such a way that it comes to them cloaked in those ideas, and they're not able to see it for what it is. To be able to see ideas, see something for what it is, free of imposing one's own ideas upon it, one needs to cultivate the kind of attention that has, as you said, humility and patience to it. And those concepts are very important. Now, Weil says, he says in this respect that, she even mentions in relation, to the smart young philosophers again, she even says, look, in school studies, for the cultivation of the capacity of attention, it's actually an advantage, okay, to not be that bright, okay, to actually struggle, okay, to have great difficulty with what you're doing. And she says that 15 minutes of genuine attention, even if you appear to not have made any progress, okay, would be worth, an hour or 2 hours of, forced straining your mental and physical muscles to memorize something, and perhaps you do make progress in grasping that content, but you've not really, maybe you've polished up your theory, okay, something like that, you've made progress in that sense, but you haven't progressed in the capacity for attention. And I can maybe just worth quoting here this, that, and that's why she says here that because it requires a putting aside of the ego, I think this is fundamental, she says that we find attention far more difficult than work or labour. So just to quote from her here.
Yeah.
It's from page 111 in I think you've got a different copy, but she says here, but in spite of all appearances, attention, is also far more difficult than tiring work. Something in our soul has a far more violent repugnance for true attention than the flesh has for bodily fatigue. This something is much more closely connected with evil than is the flesh. That is why every time that we really concentrate our attention, we destroy the evil in ourselves. If we concentrate with this intention, a quarter of an hour of attention is better than a great many good works. I think that's
where
a
I
beautiful
think
passage.
it is a beautiful passage, but where I'm a bit worried about the way your take on this is that there's always something that seems to drop out of the way you're expressing it, because attention, as she understands it, and the significance of it, the value of it, why it is actually precious.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, I can find all sorts of value in what you've just said, but it would not be the value that she has in mind. Okay, so if I develop my capacity for attention, I can be really, really good at certain things, much, much better than other people, and I can get a lot of money for that. That is perfectly consistent with, okay. I can also be really, really good at understanding what makes people tick, and getting them to comply with my wishes, really manipulate them. I can develop my capacity for attention to such a level that I'm much, much better than other people.
But that's not attention for her, because that's all ego driven.
I can just let myself. It's not the kind of attention that she has in mind.
That's right.
And what she has in mind here, and is, and this is where I think it's kind of dropping out. It's sort of you seem to always kind of to me maybe you seem to want to kind of put that aside. It's attention with a view to the love of God.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's because that is its worth. That's what makes this spiritual.
Yeah.
The other day I asked Andrew what was prayer, and he gave me an answer, but I wasn't sure that his answer.
So who gave you an answer?
You did.
Did I?
Yeah, you did.
What answer did I give?
I forgot. But at the time, I remember
you picked this up and you chose this. Opened this page at random. Did you?
I opened this page at random.
I said it was divine providence.
So I picked up Augustine because I believe, and I think Andrew does not disagree, that if we are going to form an idea of what ultimately I might mean by prayer, this is a fairly pertinent, relevant place to look in. I think she is an Augustinian. So she belongs to that theological tradition. And guys, just weirdness warning coming up. So what we need to understand is going on here is that Augustine here is writing down words which are basically between him and God. That needs to be understood. He's addressing the I is not you, the reader. Sorry, the you is not you, the reader. It's God. Say I'm about to recite a psalm I am familiar with. Before I start, my anticipation reaches to include the psalm in its entirety. But as I recite it, my memory reaches to take into the past each thing I shall be cropping from the future. So my soul's life force reaches in opposite directions, into memory, but what I have just said, into anticipation for what I'm about to say, while simultaneously perduring in the present, through which what was future is being shuttled into what is past. Hope people are following here. As I recite more and more of the psalm, anticipation is reduced in proportion as memory expands, until anticipation is cancelled and the completed psalm deposited in memory. And the transition that happens with this psalm occurs also in each of its verses, even in each of its syllables, and the same occurs in the larger liturgy of which the psalm may be a part, or in the whole of a man's life, whose parts are his separate acts, or in the whole history of the sons of man, whose parts are all the men there are. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is easy to understand. This is in a section on time. Time. What this is, the character of this is confessional. He's giving testimony to God. And he's voicing, he's expressing how he reads the Psalms as to be nearer to God. From the point of view of, so he's kind of reaching for a glimpse of eternity. So he's reading the Psalms from the point of view of as somebody who wants to take in the eternal, the God's views, as though he's trying to reach to God's view of them, or something like that.
Oh, it's a beautiful example, Vlad,
Yeah.
of I mean, that passage in itself is a prayer.
Yeah. The whole book is a prayer. What is required to bring that kind of attention into the studies is faith.
Oh, great. Yes.
Okay.
I wanted to, good.
So the indispensable
Good. Let's get on to
condition
this.
is faith.
Okay.
Because not because God isn't real. It's because the light of God might not be present in your soul. So the attention. You need faith, which in this case means the expectation that God will shine His light on you.
Yes.
That is what you're anticipating. So why is faith indispensable? Is because the anticipated, the attention is conditioned by a desire for God's love. And you can't have so the attention is conditioned by a desire for God's love, and that's why it requires faith. Being here, the sense of certainty that God's light will shine on you.
Yes.
It's an anticipatory certainty. So when I'm attending, the way in which my attention is shaped by this desire is not a passive. It's just an anticipatory alertness, ready to receive God in my heart. That's it. It's nothing else. Okay. The second thing that she thinks is required So the motivation, that's the point about the motivation. Your desire must be purely, that's why in developing this form of attention, no other motive has to come in, because it has to be a desire for the light of God. That's what you want to desire, not power, whatever in this world. The object of your desire must be the love of God, and that just rules out all of the other motivations. Now, that's why you need humility. Humility. So the second thing that you need is humility. And she says school studies are good to develop that kind of humility with you. If you simply want to face up to your failures.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, in the kind of anticipatory attention, which is the substance of prayer, okay. The position of the recipient has to be one of humbleness.
Yeah.
Because there's something, I think, about this relation that for in order for you to be able to it's like a condition of your receptivity of God's light. Okay, that's what I'm making of this. And let me just say, and then I'll let you
flounder around a bit.
okay, so attention in this sense,
Yes.
that's why for her is something very close to a battle with evil, which is a battle with the evil in our own hearts.
That's right.
Okay, and I'm just going to quote this from her, and I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to keep coming.
Yeah.
Attention, she says, consists of suspending our thought. Sounds like, we're going numb. Leaving it detached, empty, and ready to be penetrated by the object.
Yeah.
Actually, it means holding in our minds, within reach of this thought, but on a lower level and not in contact with it, the diverse knowledge we have acquired, which we are forced to make use of. Our thought, remember, we're doing maths. We're resolving some difficult equation in algebra. We're grappling with the grammar of Latin.
Yes.
So, and that's the kind of attention that we need to bring to that. We're going to need to try to bring to that. Attention consists of suspending our thought, leaving it detached, empty, and ready to be penetrated by the object.
Yeah.
It means holding in our minds within reach of this thought, but on a lower level and not in contact with it, the diverse knowledge we have acquired, which we are forced to make use of. Our thought should be in relation to all particular and already formulated thoughts, as a man on a mountain who, as he looks forward, sees also below him, without actually looking at them, a great many forests and plains. Above all, our thought should be empty, waiting, not seeking anything, but ready to receive in its naked truth the object that is to penetrate it. All wrong translations, all absurdities in geometry problems, all clumsiness of style, and all faulty connection of ideas in compositions and essays, all such things are due to the fact that the thought has seized upon some idea too hastily, and being thus prematurely blocked, is not open to the truth. The cause is always that we have wanted to be too active. We have wanted to carry out a search. This can be proved every time for every fault if we trace it to its root. There is no better exercise than such a tracing down of our faults.
Yeah.
For this truth is one to be believed only when we have experienced it hundreds and thousands of times. This is the way with all essential truths.
Yeah.
So let me just say,
Which connects to recollection, by the way.
The solution of a geometry problem does not in itself constitute a precious gift, but the same law applies to it because it's the image of something precious. So there's something analogous in working the spiritual value of school exercise done properly.
Yes.
Right? I mean, done properly, with rigor, where you're facing up to your errors, you struggle through it, is that it is analogous to the exercise which is prayer and which will be rewarded by the light of God. So it's analogous to, or it's a representation of.
Yeah. No, that's good, Vlad. That's very good. Just on this question, this of faith. Because I think, you're absolutely right. Yes, the faith even speaks of a desire for God, and that one's school studies must be conducted not just that they are a preparation for prayer, but in order to be a preparation for prayer, you need to undertake them with that intention as your sole motive. She says, your sole motive. Wow. So that's about getting the incentives out of the way again. But we've also got this notion of faith, which I believe has a wider importance here. And she quotes, this is a very short quote. An Eskimo story explains the origin of light as follows. In the eternal darkness, the crow, unable to find any food, longed for light, and the earth was illumined. Now, sounds like magic put like that, okay? Yeah. It's also kind of recollects, brings back to mind Genesis. But in the eternal darkness, the crow, unable to find any food, longed for light, and the earth was illumined. So her longing was met, okay? The longing in the parable for the master to open the door, the food met. When the longing is pure, the patience and the waiting are true and faithful, one is rewarded. And I want to suggest here that I think there is another crucial Platonic thought here, which is that when your mind and your heart are focused on something truly good,
desirous of something.
Or desirous of something.
Because you're calling it to come to you.
You cannot ultimately be disappointed. That your trust cannot be mistaken. Now that sounds like an awfully big call to make, and I don't know, but I think it's an essentially Socratic idea. And the only way I can put it at the moment, which is very inadequate, and it's a way that kind of will make more sense to those who are philosophers than those who are not, but to put it in this way is that, as you would be familiar in debates in metaethics, there are two ways in which philosophers would think a claim in ethics can go wrong, okay? So I might say stealing is wrong, okay, for example. Maybe I've just got it wrong there, okay? I mean, maybe stealing is okay in some circumstances, just made a moral mistake. But suppose we clear all those errors up, okay? We just get it right about stealing and when it's justified and when it's not or whatever. Okay, then another kind of philosopher comes along and says, but hold on, all moral propositions are false because they commit you to have ontological commitments which are inconsistent with modern science, okay? Now, very, very nutshell philosophy, I think part of the Platonic idea is that second way of being wrong is a furphy, which comes from imposing what you rightly earlier identified as one scientific or certain kind of fact-oriented, particularly strong now through science, conception of reality as being the only sense in which things can be real. But once you free yourself from that illusion, okay, and you realise that no, there's only the first way of being wrong about moral things. So if you can get right, if you can see, okay, properly about moral, then you are guaranteed that what is good, what is perfectly good, is also real. Just so long as once you are disillusioned of false conceptions of what it is to be real, and false conceptions of what your reward is going to be for knowing it. Okay. I just thought it was implied in what she's saying here. I think it is in an Eskimo story that The crow's faith and longing could not be a mistake. Okay, as he says, if we ask our Father for bread, He will not give us stone.
Sure.
Okay. If our hearts and minds are set on what is truly good, we will not find it to be mistaken. Okay. We will come out of the cave, and what we see will be real.
Yep.
So long as we can get free of mistaken conceptions of reality.
You better have something to say to the objection that you're just dreaming something up and then you're calling it real.
Yeah, I think that is a standard objection to the kind of position that I've sketched. I think there's no...
I mean, what is the difference? The question would be,
what
is the difference between dreaming something up,
Yeah.
okay, dreaming something up and saying it's real, convinced that it is real, and actually being in touch with God, or with goodness, or with...
The problem with answering that question, it's one I've had many times, the problem with answering that question is that ultimately the only way we can grasp what it is to understand the reality of goodness is precisely to go on the journey of patiently and humbly opening our minds to good.
But then you're answering it. Then you're answering it.
Well, yes, I am.
And there is a difference between doing it authentically and
Absolutely, but it's not as if I can give an answer here and now. All I can do is hand waving and say, well, you just have to immerse yourself in it. You have to understand it. There's no shortcut to... I'm not saying you're answering, but philosophers often will ask that question, and they are after the correspondence theory of truth. I know you're not, but I can only answer the question by saying, well, let's read Augustine, and then we'll find out.
The whole idea. Yeah. This is the passage which I think maybe an atheist can accept.
Okay.
Or I'm just putting this up. She says here, not only does the love of God have attention for its substance, the love of our neighbor, which we know to be the same love, is made of the same substance.
Yes.
Those who are unhappy, this is the one that struck the chord with me the most. Those who are unhappy have no need for anything in this world, but people capable of giving them their attention. The capacity to give one's attention to a sufferer is a very rare and difficult thing. It is almost a miracle. It is a miracle. Nearly all those who think that they have this capacity do not possess it. Warmth of heart, impulsiveness, pity are not enough. In the first legend of the Grail, it is said that the Grail, the miraculous vessel that satisfies all hunger by virtue of the consecrated host, belongs to the first comer who asks the guardian of the vessel, a king 3/4 paralyzed by the most painful wound, what are you going through? Okay? What are you going through? It is a recognition that the sufferer exists, not only as a unit in a collection or a specimen from the social category label unfortunate, but as a man exactly like us, who was one day stamped with a special mark by affliction. Okay? For this reason, it is enough, but it is indispensable to know how to look at him in a certain way. This way of looking is first of all attentive. The soul empties itself of all of its own contents in order to receive into itself the being it is looking at, just as he is in all his truth. Only he who is capable of attention can do it. So
that's a theme that she writes on right throughout her work, over and over.
The point that I wish to make is that even if you don't believe in God, and that attention, but if you think that a love of your fellow, I mean, I'm not sure that such a notion of a love of your fellow, which is a living sort of thing in your life, giving you sense to your life, I'm not sure that it is possible without religion. So I'm not saying one way or another.
Yeah.
Is that I don't know that that's possible. But if we say that it is possible to have a living
Yes.
faith
Yes.
in the form of a desire to bring the love of fellow sufferers as a central value, life-meaning value in our life. And understanding that such love is attention, as she defines it. Then everything else that she says about spiritual exercises can mutatis mutandis.
I agree, yeah, no, all of that's very true. I'm tempted to say more and to take things in different directions, but do you think maybe we should call it a day at the moment on this?
I think we've done enough, given that you are tired.
I'm
a bit of a bulldog, as you know. Once I grab
I
hold
thought
of
you
the
were
ball,
getting tired too. You were rubbing.
I was actually numb, but I moved my leg a bit.
Okay.
But
well,
no,
I'm happy to go on to what.
No.
We won't have too big a thing.
No, I think we need to stop and come back another day.
Okay, Vlad.
No.
That was a really good discussion.
No, thank you.
Excellent. I think we made some real headway there into some very difficult writers.
I hope so.
And I think we've got more material here to pursue on a future occasion, don't you think?
Yeah, I think we do. Hopefully someone somewhere in the world will find something of value in our conversation. If not, when we're going to be both geriatrics in 20 years' time, we can just look at ourselves.
Probably 10 years for me. Yeah, well, hopefully, if nothing else, they might be moved to go and read these papers. And in that regard, we'll make sure we'll put some links in the comments below so that you can find the papers and read them for yourself. So
good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Andrew.
Vlad. Thanks for hosting it. It's been fun, and
Thank you for
I've
coming in.
learnt a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. We'll see you next time.